I didn't plan to say it. The words just came out on an ordinary Friday afternoon, right there on my own front walkway, holding a torn paper bag, watching oranges scatter across the concrete. She was looking at me, perfectly still, not saying a thing, and I still couldn't tell you exactly why I just went ahead and told her the truth. You're too good for me, Kayla. I know that. I expected her to laugh it off. I expected her to shake her head, say something gracious, push herself up from where she was crouching, and move along. She didn't do any of that. She looked straight into my eyes and held it there for one full second, long enough that I understood this was not a throwaway response. And then she said, quietly and clearly, "That's exactly why I chose you." I had nothing. The wind moved through the oak trees. One orange was still rolling slowly in the direction of the curb. I stood there feeling like the ground had been pulled right out from under me. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Daniel Voss, 41 years old. I work as a plumber, not the kind you call at 2 in the morning when your basement starts filling with water, but the kind who moves quietly through commercial buildings, schools, hospitals, the places no one ever thinks much about. I live in Elmwood, on the west side of Columbus, Ohio. It's an older neighborhood, the kind with broad oak trees that push up through the sidewalks and two-story houses that people purchase for what they could eventually become, and then simply allow to age right alongside them. People wave to each other here. Nobody asks too much. I appreciated that about Elmwood from the very beginning, and I appreciated it even more after my marriage came apart. I had been married for 7 years, divorced for 3, no children, just this house, which I had fully planned to sell after Renee left, but kept finding reasons not to. I repainted the front door a grayish blue. I planted lavender along the walkway, the kind that comes back every August, whether you do anything for it or not. I told myself I was getting the place presentable before putting it on the market. Months went by, then a full year. Then 2. I was still there. Maybe the house needed me more than I needed to leave, or maybe I simply hadn't worked out where else I would go and wasn't ready to admit that. Both things can live alongside each other without either one being wrong. Renee was not a bad person. I want to be clear on that. She simply needed someone louder than me, someone who knew how to fill a room, who walked into a gathering and made the whole evening feel like it had been waiting for him. I was never going to be that person. I am the man who ends up in the corner of the kitchen holding a cup of coffee, listening while everyone else talks. I don't mind that about myself. I never have. But Renee needed someone she could watch and feel proud of, and after 7 years she had arrived at the honest conclusion that I was not going to become that man, no matter how long she stayed. The divorce was quiet. No lawyers making accusations across conference room tables. No ugly moments in the driveway. No late-night phone calls the neighbors could hear through the walls. We just sat across from each other one March evening and both understood that we had been doing each other a slow, accumulated disservice for years. She packed her things over a long weekend. I helped carry boxes. We were polite and genuinely sad. And then she was gone and the house exhaled. After the divorce, I narrowed things down to 3. Work, books, and fixing the occasional faucet for a neighbor who needed the help. That was the whole shape of my life, and I wasn't particularly unhappy with it. I didn't date, not because I had sworn anything off or made some deliberate decision about my heart. I hadn't done either of those things. It was simpler than that, and sadder. I had once believed I was the kind of man someone could choose and be glad they had. The marriage had taught me otherwise, and I had no interest in enrolling in the same lesson again. Near the front door, on a small hook, I kept a spare key with no label on it. It was the key to a house Renee and I had put under contract out in Westerville, a place with a covered porch, a yard with an old apple tree standing in the back corner, and a second bedroom we had never said aloud what it was meant for. We canceled the contract 1 week before closing. Renee said the timing wasn't right. I agreed without pushing back. We never went looking for another house after that. I kept the key on the hook because I didn't know what else to do with it. Maybe to remind myself that some doors simply don't get opened, and that this is not always a tragedy. Maybe because letting go of it felt like it would mean something I wasn't ready for it to mean. Both things can be true at the same time and often are. Kala Merritt moved in 2 houses down in the fall of last year, 37 years old, She worked as a welfare coordinator for the Columbus City Schools. The kind of job a person takes because they actually care about it, not because of what it pays. She was single. I knew that the way you learn things in Elmwood, not because anyone told you directly, but because the neighborhood simply finds a way to let you know. Her front porch light stayed on late most nights. She shoveled her own walk the morning after the first snow of the season. On Sunday evenings, she sometimes sat outside with a book and a blanket, even when the temperature probably didn't make it all that comfortable. We had spoken a handful of times over the fence between our yards, about the weather, about the big oak tree that required raking every October. She was friendly in a way that felt genuine rather than practiced. I was friendly back. I told myself I didn't think anything beyond that. I believed myself, and that was the honest mistake. Not that I was lying. I had simply become very skilled at not looking too closely at my own thinking. I noticed the light in her kitchen window when I drove home from jobs in the evenings. I noticed when her car was gone over a weekend. I filed none of this under the heading of noticing. I just let it collect quietly, the way dust settles on a windowsill without ever announcing that it's arrived. That Friday afternoon with the oranges was the first time we actually talked. Not across a fence. Not about the weather or the oak leaves. I had dropped one bag getting out of my truck, and the second split open at the seam the moment I stepped onto the walkway. She was passing by, walking in the direction of her house, though that was not, I would later understand, the direction she had been coming from. She crouched down and started gathering things without being asked. When we had collected everything off the concrete, she didn't stand right away. She stayed there, crouching, looking at the bag in my hands, and said, "You buy a lot of oranges." I looked down. 5 of them. "I get lost in the store," I said. She laughed. Not a polite social laugh, but a real one. Slightly surprised, like my answer had been more honest or more amusing than she had expected. I carried everything inside and didn't think about it again. I should have thought about it. Because Kala does not shop on Friday afternoons. That is not the route she takes coming home from work. And she hadn't been carrying anything. 1 week later, she knocked on my door. Her kitchen faucet was dripping, she said. She'd been meaning to call someone, but then she remembered what I did for a living. I came over and fixed it in 15 minutes. A worn-out washer? Nothing complicated. While I worked, she stood in the kitchen doorway holding a mug of tea and asked me where I had learned the trade. Nobody had asked me that in a long time. I told her about the man who taught me. A plumber in Dayton named Walt, who had no patience for complaining and enormous patience for the actual work. A man who could press his ear flat against a wall and tell you exactly what was happening inside a pipe, the way a doctor listens to a chest. Kala was quiet the entire time I talked. When I finished, she said, "He taught you how to pay attention." I didn't know how to respond to that. I just nodded and placed my tools back in the bag. She didn't seem to be in any hurry for me to leave. We stayed in her kitchen for another half hour, talking about nothing particularly pressing. A road construction project on 5th Avenue that had been slowing everyone's commute. A podcast she'd been following about cities that had clawed their way back from catastrophic decline. The particular quality of light in Ohio in late October, which she said felt different from anywhere else she had lived. I told her I had never lived anywhere else, so I had nothing to compare it to. She said that was either a limitation or a gift, and she wasn't sure which. When I finally stood up to leave, I was surprised at how late it had gotten. Months later, well after everything between us had changed, I asked her about the faucet. She gave me a slow smile. "I loosened the washer myself," she said. "I just stood there." "Why?" She lifted one shoulder. "Because I wanted a reason that didn't look like what it actually was. I still haven't decided whether to be annoyed or flattered. I've landed somewhere in the middle and chosen to stay there." One morning I found a book placed outside my front door, set neatly on the mat with a small folded note tucked inside the cover, Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. The note said, "I think you'll like the ending more than the beginning." No name on it. I recognized the handwriting from the little card on her mailbox the day she moved in. I read the novel in 3 days, in my kitchen before work, in my truck on lunch breaks, finishing the last 20 pages after midnight on a Wednesday. She was right about the ending. I kept her note tucked inside as a bookmark and did not ask myself why I was keeping it. I simply left it there and went on with my life. What I didn't know until she told me much later was that she had read Gilead 3 times herself. Each time, she had thought about who she might eventually pass it on to. She had been waiting for the right person to give it to. One evening, I came home from a job and she was there, and she noticed the unlabeled key hanging on the hook just inside my entryway. She asked what it opened. I set my bag down. "A house that doesn't exist anymore," I said. She didn't push for more. She gave one slow, quiet nod. The kind that says, "I understand what you're not saying, and I'm not going to ask you to say it out loud right now." As if she understood that some things people hold on to, not because they still want them, but because they haven't yet figured out how to let go without that feeling like a declaration they aren't ready to make. I thought she was being polite. I know now she was doing something far more deliberate than politeness. She was seeing me. Not the version I had learned to present to the world, but the actual one underneath it, the one I had largely stopped introducing to people. I started waking up earlier. No particular reason, I told myself. Kala usually came out to her porch with coffee around 7 in the morning, in whatever she had slept in, hair pulled back, standing in the cold for a few minutes before heading back inside. Some mornings we waved from across the yards. Some mornings I carried my mug out and we talked across the distance between our houses. Neither of us ever suggested moving closer. The gap just kept narrowing on its own. One week, we were raising our voices slightly across 30 feet of grass. A few weeks after that, I was standing at the bottom of her porch steps. I only noticed the progression looking back on it. The way you only understand you've been walking towards something once you've already arrived. Kala, I eventually learned, is not a morning person. She had never been a 7 o'clock person. She had made herself one. One evening I did the arithmetic. She had knocked on my door 4 separate times in 2 months, each time with a reason. The faucet, a borrowed drill, a question about an electrician she was trying to hire, returning the book. But every single time she stayed longer than the errand called for, and every time she left, the house was quieter than it had been before she came. A specific kind of quiet, the kind that has the shape of one particular absence. I sat with this for a while. I turned it over carefully. And then I told myself, this cannot be what it looks like. She reads Marilynne Robinson. She does work that genuinely matters to people who have very little, and she does it because she believes it matters, not because anyone is watching. She knows how to sit with someone in silence without feeling the need to fill it. And that is a skill that has to be learned and costs something to learn. And I am a 41-year-old plumber who keeps an unlabeled key on a hook in his front hallway to a house that hasn't existed in 3 years. I am not the kind of person someone chooses deliberately. I am the kind of person someone finds themselves comfortable beside when they have stopped expecting something grander. I had made peace with that. Or I had told myself I had. One afternoon, I asked her directly. We were standing on my porch, and I just said it plainly. Kala, don't you have other people to talk to? Friends? People from work? She looked at me for a moment. Something moved across her face. Not offense. Just a kind of considering. Yes, she said. But they don't ask me what you ask me. I haven't asked you much, I said. Exactly, she said quietly. You ask the few things that actually matter. I didn't know what to do with that. So I did what I always do when something is more than I can handle directly. I let it settle at the back of my mind, like a book I keep meaning to return to. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner alone in my kitchen in the evenings and looked at the light in her window 2 houses down and told myself it meant nothing that I looked, that it was simply what a person does when they live on a street with other people, and those other people have lights on. The smell of oak in October, the sound of dry leaves on the walkway, the yellow light in her kitchen showing through the branches at 8 on a Thursday night. Me telling myself I was not looking, me looking anyway. Smaller things kept accumulating in ways I chose not to examine. The afternoon, the Sunday she brought over cornbread she said she'd made too much of, and stood in my kitchen doorway watching my face while I tasted it, with a kind of focused attention that seemed like a great deal of investment in someone's opinion of cornbread. The way she always arrived when I happened to be around. Never when I had mentioned being out. Always when I had mentioned being home. I was slow to put it together. Not from stupidity, but from the particular caution of a man who had once been wrong about something important and did not want to be wrong about it again. Renee called on a Tuesday. Not to ask, to inform. I'm stopping by to pick up that box. There was a real box. It had been sitting in my basement since the day she moved out, 3 years before, and I had genuinely forgotten it was there. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon and walked in the way she always had, taking a slow look around the room the way someone does when they once had some kind of claim on a place. "You repainted the door," she said. "Yeah, I like the old color better." I didn't reply. I went down to the basement. When I came back up, Renee was standing in the living room with Gilead in her hands. She was reading the small folded note tucked inside the cover. "Whose handwriting is this?" she asked without looking up. "A neighbor." She closed the book and set it on the shelf, unhurried, like she was being deliberate about something. "The woman 2 doors down?" "I've seen her on her porch." A pause that had some weight behind it. "Does she actually know you?" "The real version of you." "We're neighbors," I said. "That's all." Renee looked at me the way she used to when she had already reached a conclusion and was simply waiting for me to catch up. "You haven't changed," she said. Her voice wasn't cruel. It was tired in the particular way of someone who has stopped being surprised by a specific disappointment. She said I never noticed when someone wanted more from me, and that even when I did notice, I couldn't work out how to give it. She said I kept people at a distance without realizing I was doing it, that I was better at listening than at actually being present, that I allowed distance to stand in for closeness, and called it respect. Every statement carried its proportion of truth. She had a precise instinct for placing each one where it would land hardest and be most difficult to dismiss. But she was not saying these things to help me understand myself. She was saying them to plant something, a specific doubt, shaped to fit the specific uncertainty she sensed in me. She wanted me to look at Kala and wonder whether what I had been seeing was real, or whether I was simply a man alone in a neighborhood reading warmth into neighborly kindness because he needed to. She wanted me to doubt it. She succeeded. She said she wasn't accusing me of being intentionally unkind. She wanted to be fair about that. She said it was simply the way I was made, and she had spent 7 years waiting for that to change, and now she understood that it wouldn't. She picked up the box and walked to the front door. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe and looked back. "You're a good man, Daniel. Just not quite enough of one." She left. Her car was gone before I reached the window. I didn't know Kala had been on her porch. She had been out there long enough to hear the last part. When Renee's car pulled away, Kala was standing in the yard between our houses, looking at me through the screen door. I thought about raising my hand. I didn't. I turned and went inside and closed the door and stood in the kitchen until the evening light went gray outside. For 10 days, I did not go out to the porch in the mornings. The coffee sat cold on the counter. When Kala knocked one Wednesday evening, one knock, then silence, I stood in the kitchen and listened to the absence of a second knock. I felt like the worst version of myself standing very still in the dark. I looked at the key on the hook and ran Renee's words through again. She had been wrong about many things over 7 years, but not about all of them, and the ones she had gotten right had a way of staying with me regardless of how I felt about her. What did I actually have to give Kala? What was I offering? A man who woke up early to stand on his porch because he liked to see a light on somewhere nearby. A man who kept a key to a house that had not existed in 3 years and could not fully explain why, even to himself. What did that say about where I was? The folded note from Kala was still inside the book on my coffee table. I walked past it again and again. I never moved it. I told myself that was inertia. It was not. 10 days after Renee's visit, at 6 in the evening, I heard a knock. I opened the door. Kala was standing on the porch. No book, no excuse, no bag of anything. Just her in a jacket I recognized, hands tucked into her pockets. She looked at me for a long moment. "You're avoiding me." Not a question. A statement, delivered like a fact. "Kala." She didn't say anything. I stepped back from the door. "Come in." I made coffee without asking whether she wanted any. I filled the kettle, got the cups down, measured the grounds. She sat at the kitchen table and said nothing about it. I sat across from her and told her everything. Renee's visit, the things Renee had said, The 10 days I had spent sitting with each of those things and turning them over. I told it plainly and without softening any of it, because I thought she deserved the version with nothing taken out. When I finished, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car moved slowly down the block. Kala was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And you believe her?" I looked at my hands resting on the table. She wasn't wrong about everything. That's what makes it hard to put down. I paused. "Kala." She waited. "You're too good for me." I don't mean that as self-deprecation. I mean it as a conclusion I've turned over for 10 days and cannot argue myself out of. You know how to be with people. You do work that genuinely matters, and you don't need anyone's acknowledgement for it. You read the right things, and you understand your own reasons for reading them. And I am a 41-year-old plumber who still keeps a key to a house that hasn't existed in 3 years on a hook beside his front door. I don't know what I'm offering you. She held my eyes. She didn't look away. She didn't soften what she was holding. She didn't offer me the polite way out I think part of me had been quietly hoping for. Then she said, very quietly, "That's exactly why I chose you." I didn't respond. She continued. Her voice was the voice she uses when she has thought something all the way through and is not performing the thought but simply stating it. I don't need someone without damage. I have lived near men who were certain they had none, and I know what it costs to be close to that kind of certainty. You kept that key not because you're weak, but because you don't discard the things that once held meaning for you. You fix things in places where no one will ever know your name. You ask me the questions that actually count, and you wait for the answers without trying to fill the silence. And every single time I knocked on your door without a real reason, you opened it. She paused. Every time. She looked at the cup in front of her. You made me coffee without asking if I wanted any. And you made it without sugar, because you already know I take it that way. She looked up at me. That is you knowing me, Daniel. That is not nothing. That is quite a lot. I pushed back from the table. I walked to the hook by the door and lifted down the unlabeled key. I carried it back and set it on the kitchen table between us. I did not throw it away. I did not hand it to her. I simply took it off the hook, where it had been for 3 years, and placed it on the table. Kala looked at it. Then she looked at me. She gave a small nod, the kind that says, "I see what you're doing, and you don't have to explain it." It was not erasure. It was me choosing not to let the past occupy the present tense any longer. The late light went flat and amber across the table. The coffee was warm. A car passed slowly somewhere outside. Between us, a silence settled that was not empty but full, the kind that asks nothing of you and holds everything. 3 months passed. We never gave what we had a name, and neither of us seemed to need one. Kala still lived in her house. I still lived in mine. But on Saturday mornings, we had breakfast together in her kitchen. I cooked eggs. She made coffee. Nobody had proposed this arrangement. It simply began, and then continued, and then became what Saturday mornings were. The first time it happened, I had shown up because she'd mentioned the night before that she had nothing for breakfast, and I thought, without stopping to analyze the impulse, that I'd bring enough for 2. The second Saturday I came again. By the 4th, it was simply the thing we did. One of those mornings, I noticed the bookshelf in her living room leaning slightly to the left. One bracket pulling away from the drywall. I fixed it while she was in the kitchen. She came back and found me putting my tools away. "You never ask if I need something before you do it," she said. I stopped. "Do you need this?" She smiled. About 3 weeks ago, 6 months in, I brought Gilead back to her. I had read it a second time. She turned to the page I'd marked near the end and read it aloud in her ordinary voice. No performance in it. I want to overhear future triumphs, complaints, and gossip, and know that life still abounds. She closed the book and set it on the table. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That same afternoon, we walked through Schiller Park along the path beside the pond. I reached down and took her hand. There was no occasion for it. Her hand was simply there, and I wanted to hold it. She didn't pull away. She didn't look at me or say a word. We just kept walking. 9 months after the evening in my kitchen, after the coffee, after the key on the table, after the nod that carried more weight than most sentences I had ever heard, Renee sent an email. She had heard through some chain of mutual people we'd both once known that I was with someone. She wrote that she was genuinely glad for me, that she meant it. I read the message 3 times at the kitchen table in the morning. Then I closed it and deleted it. Not from anger, but because I realized I did not need it for anything. Not to confirm what I had. Not to feel vindicated. Not even to feel something complicated about the years we had once shared. I simply didn't need it anymore. And that was the clearest measure I'd had in a long time of where I actually was. A full year after Kala came to my door with nothing to ask for and everything to say, we were sitting on my front porch in the early evening. The lavender along the walkway was giving off the last of its summer scent. She asked about the key. What did you ever do with it? I went inside and pulled open the nightstand drawer. Still there. I brought it out and showed her. I haven't decided yet, I said. And I meant it. She looked at it for a moment. That's okay, she said. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and set her house key on the arm of her chair. Keep that one for when you're ready to use it. I looked at both of them. I set mine down on the porch railing beside hers. I left them there together in the evening light. We don't have the kind of love story that works on a movie screen. No rain scene, no airport, no one running through a crowd to say the thing they should have said years ago. What we have is Saturday mornings, and a bookshelf that doesn't lean anymore, and a novel that has been read more times than is probably reasonable. I think that is what love looks like when you are old enough to understand the difference between a fire and a lamp. A fire is impressive. People gather around it, and it burns out. A lamp is the thing you forget to switch off at night because you want it to still be there when you come back. The lavender comes up every August without being asked. Kala reads aloud sometimes, to herself, or to the room, or to the window she knows I am sitting near on the porch with my coffee and the morning paper. I never interrupt. I never mention it. I just sit there and listen, because that has become one of the things I am most grateful for in my life. That I get to hear her voice moving through a book. That I am the one she lets hear it. There are 2 keys in the nightstand drawer now. There is something I understand now that I didn't understand 3 years ago. The truth is not always a weapon. Renee used truth to make me smaller, to remind me of every gap between who I was and who she had needed. Kala used truth to say something entirely different. She used it to tell me that what I thought of as my deficiencies were, to her, the very point. Not despite them, because of them. I spent 3 years hearing not enough as a final verdict. It turned out to be the opinion of someone who had not yet understood what she was actually looking for. That happens. People confuse what impresses them with what genuinely sustains them, and by the time they understand the difference, sometimes the chance to choose again has already passed. Kala did not choose me because I came without things to work through. She chose me because I was honest about what I was still carrying. And she had made that choice before I knew I was being seen, sometime in the months before that Friday afternoon. On some ordinary evening, I passed without knowing she was watching, when she looked out her kitchen window at the right moment and decided, the old key is still in the drawer. I have not thrown it away. I don't know if I will, but I use the other one now. And I have for a long time. And the door it opens is better than any door I ever believed I deserved to walk through. Sometimes, the person who comes looking for you is not coming because they need something fixed. They are coming because they have already decided. They saw what was there. They waited honestly, and they made their choice. You are simply the last one in the room to find out. Have you ever said you're too good for me when what you really meant was that you were terrified of being chosen and then losing it? And if someone has been finding reasons to be near you without ever saying it plainly, would you have noticed? Or would you have let it all pass, telling yourself it meant nothing? The way I did for longer than I should have. If this story reached something in you that you haven't quite been able to put into words, hit like and let me know. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, the imperfect kind that turn out to be the truest. And leave a comment below. When do you think Kala decided? Before the oranges hit the concrete? Or long before that afternoon, on some quiet evening Daniel never even knew about?